Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm here with composer-producer Anna Meredith. I just learned that that's the title we're using now.
That's what everyone has to use for the whole rest of the day, officially.
Yeah, and I want to sort of get right into it by maybe playing a little bit of music. So we have a track here called Shill, which is something, it's under 3 minutes long, right?
We can all hack it, right?
We can hack 3 minutes, right? Sure. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how this piece was put together and how this sort of represents a look at what it is that you're doing musically.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. So what's the 30-second encapsulation of what this piece is?
This piece, well, it's a kind of palate cleanser piece that I wanted to try and roast my very capable band. So essentially, this piece is an 11-beat riff that loses the start of the 11s each time and reduces it. You probably heard it feeling like it was condensing, and then goes through that whole process again. A roast, I would say, in summary, a little mini roast.
And so this is a combination of a band and electronics.
Yes.
Right. And this is one of the things that you're doing now.
Yep.
But you come from this strictly classical tradition, right?
Yep. I've absolutely done 7 years of hardcore contemporary classical training. Is totally where I've come from.
And then somehow found electronics after this.
Yeah, about 10 years ago.
So can you talk a little bit about how this transition happened? Or how, I wouldn't say it's a transition because now you do both.
Yep.
But how did this evolution happen?
I think it's some kind of puppet master-like control thing that quite often when you're a classical composer, most of my career in that side, and I guess still was, a lot about writing pieces for orchestras, operas, string quartets, but you write the piece, you hand it over to other people, and that's the end of your process. You can't do anything to the material once you've handed over the sheet music. You maybe can say, can we try it in mezzo forte? Rather than, it's really tiny tweaks. There's no big, let's cut figure B. So that you have to be basically a kind of craftsman at that stage of the process. And I still do really enjoy doing that, but I just found myself watching these performances just wanting to get involved and wanting more volume, but ultimately, I guess, wanting an environment where I could try and have more control over the whole process, start to finish. Because I've had pieces that I've written, and sadly in the classical world, most pieces are just played once, which is a bit gutting when you spend months and months writing something, doesn't get recorded, it's just done. But when it's suddenly, inexplicably, the conductor has played at half the speed, and you're sitting there going, "Oh no, what?" Trying to like rein this, speed up, trying to get it to change. So yeah, I think it's come from wanting more control.
But in pieces like this, where you have electronics and a band, you're giving something over to other people.
A very, very little amount. This is all so it's all notated out. Everything, my band that I've, these guys and gals that I've found to work with are very, very good players who are classically trained as well, classical trained background, but all do all kinds of interesting stuff themselves. And so, yeah, I will hand them. So the drum part, actually, it's quite interesting listening to the presentation before, because he would do the same kind of thing. The drum loop is 11 beats that then equally chops the front of the drum pattern off. So there's a connection, obviously, in the way that the instrumental stuff's written and the way that I conceive the dots.
And when you write pieces like this, can you talk a little bit about the process of making a piece like this? We have some materials to show here.
The very first thing I do when I write any single bit of music, whether it's a piece for my band or a piece for orchestra or literally absolutely anything, is I draw a sketch like this. Oh, I might have sent you the wrong sketch. But I do a sketch like this. So I draw a timeline across the bottom, and then I just try because the thing I think that I enjoy doing most in music is planning the pacing, planning it. I love to write a build, or I love to write a build that sometimes fulfills your expectations and sometimes doesn't. With every piece, I will just draw this timeline and map out kind of the dramatic contours of the story. I guess just like telling a story to your friends in the pub. You maybe don't give the, "Oh my God, we all got pelted by chickens." You maybe don't start that straight away. Maybe you lead into it and then, the chickens, come later on. And so, yeah, I don't know. Quite often a piece will come because I'll have an idea, I'll have a reveal, or I'll have an amazing idea for where a beat could come or where a bass line could come or a process that's going to happen. And then I'll map out where that moment's going to come in the piece and then work around it from there. So yeah, everything has a kind of graphic-y sketch like this. This one looks a bit tidier than most. Maybe that's why I sent it. Most of them are a bit more sketchy looking.
And you're hearing this kind of architecture before you're hearing notes or rhythms, right? It's
Exactly.
more about proportion first?
It's about proportion. I might have some adjectives. Sometimes I will slab. There I've written stab and overcut feel. And I think, who knows what that other word is? Who knows, something really insightful. But yeah, I might have a few words to help me kind of map out what the shapes mean. So I might be saying there's an oily build-up and then an aggressive sort of. So that what I probably mean in that structure is, that there's something at the bottom. That dotted line will mean that thing is under there the whole way. So when at 1 minute it all drops away, you've got that thing that's still left there. So those kind of shapes really help me map out the surprises or the sort of journey of the music, I guess. And yeah, it'll then go from the shape into these adjectives. And the next step from there would be to slightly map it out. If I knew that there was a particular chord that came here, I might draw out where that chord, if I knew that happened, I might just draw a little bit of, just scribble out treble clefs and write and the chords there. If I knew a certain rhythm was going to come, I might just scribble it on. So I'd sort of annotate these sheets. They start to get a lot messier. So that's the sort of next step.
And so one of the things that we talked about when we met ahead of time, which I thought was really interesting, is that this is usually with you from the beginning to the end. Mm-hmm. So I've met a lot of other composers who have this kind of architecture process in mind, but then when they start to put notes and rhythms on it, they make major changes. And you find that that's not the case for you, right? Usually you're right with what you want?
How smug. But I think because the structure is the most important stuff in the music, I think I'm quite a broad brushstrokes kind of composer, and the big shapes are the things that I want people to take away from the pieces. If I'm making a build, I want you to come with me. I'm not trying to distance people from the process or there's no smoke and mirrors. It's all, ta-da, everything's there. So, I don't tend to revise these shapes very much because I'm almost writing to my own brief. I can see the shape I'm trying to do. I know roughly the kind of colours or atmospheres I'm going for. Maybe I've got a little idea, like I was saying, that would be great if at this point suddenly everything just, the trapdoors swing open and you're just left with this little tinkly thing. That'll be great, I'll do that. And then I'm having to sort of realise my own ideas to these shapes. So they're on my wall, whatever I'm writing, pieces for nursery age kids, orchestras, remixes, whatever I do, one of these bad boys comes with me.
So what kind of remixes are you doing?
I've done a few. I did one for John Grant a while ago. I find remixing really difficult because I make a point of not listening to the original track. And I'll just take the vocal stem because I don't think I'm the right person to just add a different beat to it. So basically I end up doing a totally new track and just trying to figure out how I can place some little bits of the existing vocal in a new place. But it's something I've done a few, did one for Maximal Park and a few other bits and people, but I'm kind of getting into it. It's fun. I think I'm working too hard on them. People keep saying, just slap a new beat. I'm like, no.
So what's the next step after this?
Okay, so the next step after I've done this and then I've annotated it, so it's a kind of like a zooming in process. I might even then do another sheet that was, here's a zoomed in moment of 3 minutes where this new thing is going to come in, and I might then slightly, do a kind of almost like a mood board for what that is with some chords and some scribbles. But eventually I'll then go to Sibelius, ye olde notation program, to write stuff. My eyes. And Sibelius, the first thing I'll do basically is put in empty bars for the whole length of the piece. And any of these ideas that I've already got, so if I know about this chord that's going to happen at this point, I'll scroll ahead to that point in the notation and put it in. Or if I know about this beat that's going to come in here, so I've got these markers that go in. And this looks like a mess. Anyone who might want to commission me, this is not how my scores normally look. Don't judge me. This is a mess because this is for me. So this is the notation for the piece you just heard. So I write everything in Sibelius because I guess I feel that's where I have the most control, and that's the kind of that's where I've trained myself to pace everything best. So I start with a very empty-looking score with lots of markers, and then I just kind of fill in the gaps.
And this is even what you do when you're writing purely electronic music. You start with notation, even though no one will read it.
Yep.
This is really interesting.
Yeah, and it looks even worse than that. Sometimes it's just a big spider's nest of notes. But that's how I know best how to control the rhythms, how I can make interesting time signature changes, how I can... It helps me write in my own way rather than being controlled by the software, which is what I found when I was going straight to various DAWs that I didn't have the skills I would normally have.
So then you export the parts that will be for the machines to MIDI.
Yep.
And then load them up into a DAW. And then you clean up the notation for the players.
Exactly.
Okay, I see.
Yep. Yep.
Uh-huh. And this band that we just heard, what is the instrumentation of this?
So my band is, I honk on a clarinet, and I've got some drums, I sing, I've got the laptop, and I've got a controller keyboard, and then I've got 2 cellos, a tuba, drum kit, and electric guitar. So it's quite eclectic. Everybody sings.
Everyone sings.
Everyone sings as well. Yeah, so no getting out of it in my band.
That's great.
Really? Do I have to? Yeah. We're all singing.
Did you have auditions for this gig, or this is people you knew from?
I've kind of picked them up. If you look at it, it's such a motley crew. Everyone's quite... they've got these... some of them are really young, sort of straight, almost out of music college. But I've basically found people through various projects who I thought, wow, they're a really versatile player. Sometimes, because in the past I've worked with some players who are very, very classical, and they've struggled with A, the singing, B, the gigging, and some of the kind of hands-on approach, I guess, that I'm looking for, as opposed to that orchestral thing. I'm looking for the band. I love being able to say to them, oh yeah, can we do this? And can we, change this, and they're happy to make the changes. So they're all classically trained, but some of them are in professional orchestras, some of them are in other bands as well, but they're all able to read complicated notation and memorize it somehow.
And is this the band that will be here for the gig?
Yes.
This band. Okay, so
Yeah.
I need to plug a gig for Anna and band. Will be at the Canteen at Berghain on November 18th. For those of you who are in Berlin, perfect. For those of you who are not in Berlin, you should fly back, probably.
Thank you.
So, but the really interesting thing that we talked about before, I think, so there are so many musicians, like young composers, who grew up listening to rock and roll and pop music, and then they get into a conservatory environment, and that's where they're starting to put notes on paper for the first time. And you came at this from entirely the opposite direction, right?
Yes. I didn't know about composition as a thing. I wasn't one of those composers who was, guffing out symphonies age 5. I didn't write a piece until I was 16, where you had to for your Scottish exams, and I wrote this piece called Reflections, which, because I spelled reflections wrong, and it was for...
You were 16, it's fine.
I know, but 16, isn't it? Anyway,
well, it's okay.
Pretty embarrassing. And it was for... Yamaha PSS, 0.2 keyboard, where you had to headbutt the keyboard to change the sounds with your nose because there wasn't any hands. So that was the first piece I ever wrote, and my school teacher went, "Oh, that's quite interesting. Maybe you should do some more." Yes. So then I went into I've had a very Royal College of Music, University of York. Once I decided I'm a composer, I kind of really went for it.
But you've been really successful at that part of the work too, which is really unusual. There aren't so many successful contemporary concert music composers, and you are one of them.
Thank you. I've been unbelievably lucky. I had big pieces. So last night, the proms, like 40 million people, saw those pieces. And I've written a lot of pieces for the BBC proms. And I was composer in residence for the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra and another composer with another orchestra in the Midlands in UK. So that is how I make my living now, is through mostly commissions for, increasingly some stuff for film and things. But the majority of my income comes from commissions from professional ensembles.
But so there's this amazing quote that I have to read that was in another interview that you did, where you said, "My contemporary art music funds my burgeoning middle-aged pop sensation career."
That's absolutely.
Which is great, because I think a lot of people have this image of like, you've been pretty successful with this album, Varmints, which is a lot of this kind of music, but it's nothing in comparison to what you're getting from doing things for the BBC proms, right?
Totally.
Right.
I've got such respect. It sounds a bit obvious, but I had no idea how hard it is to make an album and tour an album. And, it was when I see bands and producers and how hard everyone's just doing stuff off their own back and putting so much, it's really humbling. And coming from a classical background where there is so much infrastructure and support, I'm not saying it's easy. It's a very hard thing to make a living as a composer, but there is support, and you don't have to be as panicked about how many people come to things. An empty hall isn't necessarily the end of the world, and there's a team of people to help you realize the ideas. So, when I started writing electronics, a lot of my composer friends were all, "Ooh, selling out," and I was like, "You have no idea, no idea." So, making this album, making Varmints. Well, I did 2 EPs before that, but making this album has crippled me. And it's been such hard work and money and the time, not just my time, the band's time. And I've, relied on so many favors. And, I'm very lucky to have the support that I do have. But I've been absolutely amazed at just what it takes to make something on your own.
So how did you manage to get this album out on a label that has no connection with the concert music world? Did these people find you? Did you find them? Yeah,
I think I had quite a 90s idea of what getting on a record label would be. So when I first did the first EPs, I made about 5,000 EPs, which are still in my loft. If anybody wants them, please let me know. And I sent them to all the please don't send us any demos, addresses, and never heard anything. And it's such an obvious thing. It's just one of those connections. I'm on Moshi Moshi Records, which is a sort of indie label in the UK. They have a very eclectic roster. And I think it was one of their Stephen Bass, Moshi Moshi, heard a friend said, you got to hear this, and played him one of my tracks, and we met, and I said, yeah, I'd like to do some EP, put these EPs out and maybe look at doing an album, and they've been really supportive and really, given it's quite different to the other stuff on their label, really open-minded and helping us sort of take a slightly different direction to maybe what they thought we wanted, maybe what I thought we wanted. But so, it's an evolving thing. You do one thing, you tick it off, then you kind of move on.
So how are you balancing the work with promoting this record and stuff with the band with your commissions that are coming in from orchestras?
Yeah, it's a nightmare. This year has been, all I do is whinge about how exhausting it's been. It's been an amazing year with this album. So, normally I spend most of my time in my bedroom, in my pants, covered in soup, just composing on the end of my bed. But this year, a lot of stuff has changed. I've got a studio, I can go to work, which is great. So that's the first time I've ever not worked from home, which makes such a difference. But in terms of the workload, I still took on a lot of interesting commissions for this year. I've written a piece for the Kronos Quartet. I wrote the David Bowie prom arrangements for Mark Hammond. I've done some remixes. I've done some installation stuff. I've done some film work. But on top of that, the band has done 35 gigs or something, all over the EU. We're off to Iceland Airwaves tomorrow, and trying to juggle that stuff. I'm whinging. I wasn't going to whinge. I'm whinging, but it's it's really tough. I find I'm in the tour bus, like bumping along with my Sibelius, trying to write, and trying to keep on top of all the logistics. And it's been difficult, but I'm so happy it's gone well and that people seem to like the album. It's been amazing.
And so when you're now writing orchestral music and you've seen you mentioned before, like you wanted more control, you wanted more power, you wanted to be able to get the things done more than once. Is it now a situation where like, oh no, I have to write this big orchestra piece, this is what pays my bills, but it's not really, you're not passionate about it as much as you are about working with your band, or is it an entirely different mindset?
I try and, I've been really lucky with the kind of commissions I'm offered. I guess I've done a lot of very odd pieces over the years. I've done pieces for MRI scanners and pieces for these big body percussion pieces that have no instruments in them at all. And so I think people, when they come to me, quite often, there's a lot of the meetings start with, I've had this crazy idea. And then it kind of goes from there. So I tend to only take things that I think I can do a good job with, and I know that sounds obvious, but if I don't get the visceral hand clenching when someone says an idea and I think, oh yeah, I can do that, then I'm trying to say no to make sure I'm only taking things that are massive. But I'm trying to avoid taking anything too big. I know how big writing a huge orchestra piece, it takes months and months and months. So I'm trying to just take, looking ahead to the next couple of years, to just take things that I think are something I haven't done before or new challenges. I'm up for challenge. And so, being a bit picky.
So you mentioned the body percussion stuff. Maybe we should look at that piece a little bit.
Sure.
So there's a sketch here. Oh, I'm so lost on this computer. There's a sketch here that you sent.
Okay.
So what's happening here?
Yes. Okay. Nobody's meant to. These were my sketches. These are. So don't feel. Don't judge the scrappiness. But, okay. So I've written the history here is that I've written 2 pieces now for just body percussion and beatboxing. I did a beatbox concerto before I did either of these pieces. I think the world's first beatbox concerto, where I notated out all the beatboxing, and so we had to make a new notation.
This was with Shlomo.
This was with Shlomo, yeah. And we're doing it again next year, which should be great, touring it about. But the offshoot of that was I got into this acoustic beatboxing sounds, these kind of just phonetics, just where you actually, so where you see the one where it's right, left, ka, left, right, ka, shp, roll, clip, side, down. So the idea is this sort of phonetic stuff that's sort of where there's not a, oh, that's not right. Yeah, that you can kind of just see what the sound should be when they're written there. So this piece is called Connect It. It's the second one I then did after that, and it was a brilliant thing with the BBC did this scheme called 10 Pieces, where they wanted to get primary school kids into classical music as starting points for all kinds of art. So it could be dance, it could be storytelling, it could be music. So they commissioned me to make another of these body percussion pieces, a shorter one, and also to make a simplified version for little kids to do. So this, what you're seeing here, is kind of how I visualize the formations of the group. If you watch this piece, there's like down the left is where the different circles of the groups are. And then there's just stuff like, these are the little riffs that you're playing with. Most of the stuff I write is based on basically very simple fragments that are just slightly offset with each other. So the materials are really simple so that it can all be memorized. But the idea is that the performers never see this. This is what I would use to teach the groups, the people who've performed it. And then, they have it memorized. But I think if you start, especially the initial piece I wrote for body percussion, which is called Hands Free, for the National Youth Orchestra, 165 of them all popped down their cellos and did this piece. And I think if I'd given them music, as classical musicians, we are so reliant on sheet music and take it away. But if you teach people it, and you talk to them about, communicating, you're going to be looking at an audience with nothing in front of you between the audience. It's a really great way to showcase other skills you have as a musician: rhythm, performance, be able to deliver complex ideas together, a feeling of community. And also it's great body percussion because it's free. You don't need any training. You don't need any expensive instruments. You don't need to be able to read music because someone will just teach you a little riff that you know. And like I said, I've made a simple version of this for primary schools. There's a video you can see where I do basically an exercise regime where it's cut screen and I'm at the side teaching a simple version of this for 7 or 8-year-olds.
So we have a clip of Hands Free, which we can watch.
Yeah.
This is a YouTube video, so I'm not sure where you want to go
Maybe
from.
the last bit, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, something like that.
Okay. So we'll watch the last couple of minutes of this.
Sure. Oh, thank you.
That looks really fun.
Yeah, it's
and they look like they're having a lot of fun.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's so tiring. Every time I'd be like, come on, guys. And then when you do it, because I suppose it's communicating that doing a gesture is the same, if you go like that, that's the same as playing a wrong note on your instrument. So you're trying to make the connection between the movement, the quality of movement, the quality of sound, whether it was beatbox sounds being the equivalent of, playing the right or wrong stuff in your instrument. So it took us a while to get there, but yeah, it's fun to do.
And so this is a National Youth Orchestra. These kids know how to play. I mean, you can assign them slightly harder music than you would for the young students, for example, right?
Yes. I mean, they wanted that piece was a commission where I had to write a 12-minute body percussion piece, which is quite a strange commission to be given. Or they asked me to do a 12-minute clapping piece. I think they thought of the Steve Reich clapping music. But they're amazing musicians, so I knew I could do quite complicated stuff, but it was a challenge for them, memorizing stuff. We're not used to memorizing. Again, taking down the instruments, there was a bit of resistance to that. Some of the movement stuff, I worked with a brilliant choreographer called David Ogle, who has done these other pieces with me as well, because I wanted to be exaggerations. When you see beatboxers, quite often they're just illustrating the sounds they're making, so it's that kind of idea of Yeah, just highlighting the sounds rather than necessarily shoehorning in. I do the shoehorning in the next piece, tons of movement there. But this piece was, because you couldn't move your feet because you might kick a cello. So yeah, this piece is all upper body stuff.
So you said there was resistance to putting the instruments down, but it looks like they're completely in the palm of your hand by this performance. Like they're really into it.
Thank you. Yeah, we did a lot of performances. We did a flash mob of this in the M6 services in the middle of to bemused coffee drinkers and like motorway service stations. But we did it at the at the Barbican, and we toured it quite a bit by then. And this was the sort of final. This was at the proms, and yeah, I think they were in it by then. I'd won them over, but it was tough. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm interested in, you talked a little bit when we talked before about your relationship with education. You do a bit of teaching, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things you said that freaked me out a little bit was that a lot of students don't like their own music.
Yeah.
When you're teaching composition, for example. And this makes me really sad.
Yes.
But how does this happen?
I think it's a product of, if you're studying classical composition, that there is there's a lot of teacher respect, I guess, and quite often maybe the way that marks or competitions are set up, that to get the good marks involves being able to have a very clever explanation for your piece. There'd be a lot of times where I'd be speaking to young composers and they'd have amazing, what's your piece about? Well, crack knuckles, and there'd be this whole algorithm of this and a poetry, and I took every sixth word and all this sort of stuff. And it would sound incredible, but the actual piece they came up with, I think it was almost like a defense to create something you have no direct attachment to yourself. You're using a process, so you're saying, well, it's nothing to do with me. I didn't write this shit. Someone else has done it. So I think there was this idea basically where young composers are trying more to think about what's going to get them the marks or what they think their teachers are going to like. But yeah, I've asked loads of people, do you like your music? No. I don't like music, no. I like hearing other people play it because that's satisfying, but I would never listen to it. And the music they would listen to would be much more, in a way, accessible, or they'd love their Elgar or their Justin Timberlake or whatever, and I'd be saying, well, why are you writing like this? Why aren't you writing something you want to hear? And I think there was this idea that it's an academic exercise rather than about writing something that you love, which is, like you say, really sad.
But I mean, I guess to play devil's advocate a little bit from a pedagogical perspective, you could say maybe there is value in trying out a new technique, for example. But then I guess you have to find a point at which you're thinking about personal voice.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, I think totally agree. You should try everything, try all kinds of techniques. It's when you feel this is the music that I write, but I hate it. I think that's odd, and absolutely, I've written in hundreds of terrible pieces that I would never play anybody. And it just took, actually, for me, I went on a course where we had to write something for the next day. And because it was so quick, I didn't have time to create all these weird infrastructures I would create normally, which explained the material, which seems so strange to me now, but that's what I used to do. And I just had to write this thing overnight. So writing quickly can be a really good way to make you lose the things you might normally do and forces you to get to see what's good and bad in your writing, I think.
That's a really interesting thing, because I think a lot of people use this sort of pre-composition process as a way to set themselves on a path, but maybe also to stall for time.
Yeah.
Because the actual act of making creative decisions is the one where you're burying your soul.
Yeah.
Right. But so now you've skipped this first part and it's just all soul bearing now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know what I can do now, and I know where I want to go and stuff I want to do, but I'm still taking on new challenges. Like when I started thinking I'm going to write electronics, then I've expanded the band, and now we're doing live shows, and there's always new things to learn. But I also think it's about why I do this odd process with the Sibelius, and it's because it's about working out what works for you and what not what someone else writes or what's software they use, or what their thoughts are about what kind of synths you're using or whatever, or equally in the classical world there's exactly the same things about, oh, is that a major chord you've got there? Oh my god, there's cliques in every world, it turns out. So yeah, it's just about, I always end up trying to avoid saying be true to yourself. Yeah.
Do your cliques get along? Like, you've got people who are going to come to the Berghain Canteen, and there are going to be people who will come see your pieces at the BBC proms. These are not the same people, are they? or are they?
Well, it's been really nice when there's been overlap. I've done another piece this year, which has been a really big thing with the Scottish ensemble, who are a brilliant string orchestra with harpsichord, and they asked me to write a new piece for string orchestra and electronics, which would have my music and Vivaldi's Four Seasons in the same piece. And again, this is one of those things where I was asked 2 or 3 years ago, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then when it actually came to write it, I was like, oh my God. How am I going to do? How can you write around the Four Seasons? And I didn't listen to the Max Richter because I didn't want to know what he'd done, and I haven't reworked the Vivaldi. But the finished piece, we're premiering it in Glasgow and Edinburgh in the Scottish premieres. Sorry, we did one in London early in the year. And it's really nice. It's in the round. It's got surround sound and surround visuals. My sister's Donna, she does a lot of visual stuff for me. But that's been really nice because I've had people coming to that concert who've never been to a classical concert before, and equally, people come to my gigs because they like my classical stuff. And I feel pretty chuffed that I could help anyone make that kind of jump.
That's great. I feel like we should open up the floor for some questions when we're fairly low on time. So I think the trick is to come up to the mic. Is that how we're doing, or are you handing the mic around? Excellent. Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
I wanted to ask about how you feel now going into performance, like being on stage and touring, and how that has shifted for you from like composing on your bed, with soup, and how that has changed in your mindset.
It's definitely, thank you. It's been a really interesting shift. I've never thought of myself as a performer. When I very first started writing electronics, I was not looking at the audience, couple of little faders, and I thought, this is silly, I'm not performing enough. So I've written myself more to do. I've dusted off the clarinet and I love playing it, and I'm singing even though I have a voice of a 5-year-old boy. It doesn't stop me. So I've kind of found ways to make it work for me so that I can play alongside this amazing, the band. The practicalities of it, are really difficult. Driving the misery van all around Europe, but it still feels pretty new for me. I guess it's just only really this year that I've done it. It's tough juggling the both time-wise. Like I was saying, I've been writing on the bus a lot and lots of all-nighters, but I guess for just now it still has the novelty factor. But I can see it's evolving. I feel we're getting better. I'm getting more confident, definitely, and I enjoy speaking to, rambling at the audience like I'm doing here. And I love it. It's so nice to be there playing your own stuff and not just watching other people do it. And that's not something I think as a composer you are trained or it occurs to you to do in your conventional studies.
First of all, I have to thank you for the Varmints album. It's probably my best musical experience in 2016.
Hey, you heard that, man.
Yeah. Wonderful. If you haven't heard it, check it out.
Oh, thanks.
The thing I want to ask you about is the use of odd time signatures.
Right.
Because you have, first time I listened to your album, I thought, wow, cool, groovy. And wow, it's 11/4, it's 5/4, it's 7/8. It's, well, even funnier time signatures. And when you write music with all these kind of time signatures, do you think that, well, I'm going to write the piece in 11/8? Or does it come naturally? You find a hummable melody and then you just, wow, it's 11/8.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a bit of both. There's a song in the album called Taken, which is a real pop song, but it's got a sort of 7/4 chorus, and it feels very natural to me. I hope that some people listening to it, well, most people won't care what time signature stuff are in, but if you're the kind of person who likes that kind of thing, I feel I've left little treats along the way. There's metric modulations and cross rhythms galore. You're going to love it. Sometimes it's both. I think I'm so comfortable with unusual time signatures that I quite often don't even realize things are in the time signatures they are till I actually work. I'm singing it in my head, or I've got the shape for the brief of the thing that I need something a little more angular, so I write it to my own brief. And there's been a few other times, like with Shill, I knew that I needed it to have this condensing shape, and I think I naturally came up with the 11, but then I had to obviously force it into the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4 to go through that process. But yeah, my hope is to try and make awkward things feel natural at the point of the music, not necessarily to fox people deliberately.
Hello.
Hello.
Very, very interesting everything you're talking about. And I was wondering, okay, you work in Sibelius and you export the files and you import it into your DAW. And isn't that also a very complex process? I mean, I've been doing that myself. And but what is the challenges when you move files from Sibelius into your DAW, and also what kind of DAW do you use?
Yeah.
And also, do you use Sibelius first when you do film music, for example? Could you say something about these things?
Yeah, I'll use Sibelius for. I'll use Sibelius as a, unless it's body percussion stuff, no point, but I will still draw my plans and then I'll go to these rough sketches. My sort of thoughts with production are in a way that if I can make it work in Sibelius, I can make it work in anything. So if I can make it work with terrible, terrible MIDI sounds, then I'm only going to make it better from there. So I work quite hard at the building block stage to make sure that it's a good written bass line and it's a good written drum beat in Sibelius, so that I'm not relying too much on just glossy production, which is not necessarily my expertise. I use Ableton, and also Audacity sometimes. But yeah, mostly Ableton. So I'll take the MIDI in and I will just... Normally, I have an idea of the kind of sounds, the roles of the sounds that I want. I know it's this kind of bass line, I know it's this kind of synth sound. And sometimes I'll start with a preset and just work with it from there to tweak it into what I need it to be. But normally the hard work has gone in at the Sibelius stage.
I think we have time for one more question, a reasonably short one.
Which composers influence you?
Oh, hello.
Hey.
An interesting thing is I don't listen to any music, which is a sort of strange thing where I find that when I've got to write, how do I wrap that up into, I don't listen to music, thanks, bye. But yeah, for me, when I've got to write, I find that if I hear something good, it freaks me out and I immediately think, oh God, I should do that. I've got a lot of bad James Blake that I tried to do, and failed. So I don't listen to music because it just doesn't help me make the right conditions for writing stuff. So I listen to audiobooks and podcasts, and there are composers that I love. I love Louis Andriessen, I love Shostakovich, I love Tchaikovsky, I love Sibelius, I love Janacek. And I've got a lot of amazing composer friends who are doing really interesting stuff, and they're the people I bounce ideas off and send tracks to. Emily Hall, Chris Mayo, Matt Rogers are buddies of mine doing very interesting stuff.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. Anna, thank you so much for taking your time. Thank you all.